business news now. Could ever more powerful artificial intelligence lead to the loss of control of civilization? That's the warning from the great and the good of the tech world, including Elon Musk, a man who has relied heavily on AI to power his self-driving Tesla cars. Mr. Musk, along with more than 1,000 other tech leaders, have called for an immediate pause in the development of sophisticated AI, warning that not even the creators of such technology fully understand its potential power. It's a dramatic U-turn for Elon Musk. He was a founder of OpenAI, the company that has launched the wildly popular ChatGPT service, which provides human-like answers to the questions of its users. Well, for more on this story and the other business news of the day, including the tough financial discussions facing U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris on her Africa tour, let's cross over to Arise Business correspondent Laurie Laird, who is in London. Good to see you, Laurie. Let's
Good evening.
Be quite clear on this. Elon Musk was a pioneer in the field of AI, but now he thinks it could herald the collapse of civilization. I mean, that's a considerably weighty turnaround, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly apocalyptic consequences if you listen to Elon Musk. It is extraordinary. Elon Musk, as you mentioned, was one of the founders of OpenAI. OpenAI is the company behind ChatGPT, which is the fastest growing computer app that the world has ever seen. It can create answers to things that sound like human answers. It can write poetry. So yes, big turnaround for Elon Musk. But he's not the only person who has signed this petition. It really is, as you say, the great and good of the tech world, over 1,000 signatures. And it really is a who's who. The founder, one of the co-founders of Apple, Steve Wozniak, led his name to it. Top engineers at Google and at Facebook also have lent their names to it. And of course, these are companies that are working very, very hard on AI and trying to compete with ChatGPT. But even once you swallow that turnaround, the other thing that struck me as extraordinary is Elon Musk saying that if companies do not agree to pause their research for at least 6 months, that governments should step in with a moratorium on preventing them from doing research. When have you ever heard Elon Musk or any other tech bro asking for the regulators to step in? These are usually people who are telling the regulators to move away and telling them to stop stifling innovation.
Has Laurie, Mr. Musk mentioned specific issues about AI that concern him?
I mean, he spoke a little bit about potential job losses, but the point he seems to be trying to make is that a lot of people who are creating this AI don't understand it themselves. So the chaos and the consequences that could result are essentially unknowable. He claims that these very, very smart computer programmers aren't quite sure what they have unleashed. Now, Europol, which is the pan-European policing agency, earlier this week issued a statement about the dangers of AI, and they talked about things like phishing. They talked about things like cybercrime. They also flagged up the potential for misinformation. And here I've got a little bit of experience, Charles. A colleague of mine asked ChatGPT to write my bio, and while the bio was immensely flattering, it actually gave me a Pulitzer Prize. It was patently untrue. Very little of this bio is true. So it just goes to show you the potential for misinformation with these artificial intelligence services.
Well, absolutely. Let's move on, Laurie, to Kamala Harris and her tour of Africa, what's been called part of America's charm offensive on the continent. Of course, there are political and financial reasons for her trip, aren't there?
Absolutely. And let's start with the financial. She started her trip off in Ghana. She is ending in Zambia. Both of these countries are currently negotiating with the IMF for a bailout. Now, America, as the biggest contributor to IMF funds, will certainly want to know how these talks are going. We'll want to know what kind of economic reform these countries will make to avoid getting into this situation yet again. But Kamala Harris has, I think, another challenge ahead of her. She spoke yesterday yesterday at Accra before leaving Ghana, and she talked about the need for better governance in Africa. And I suspect this could lead to some fairly tense conversations. Have a listen to what she said.
Together, we can unleash growth and opportunity that far exceeds what either the public or private sector can achieve on its own. And the United States is committed to build these types of partnerships to increase digital inclusion on the continent. And finally, to create inclusive economic growth and to advance innovation, we must
Charles, it looks like we were cut off at just the right spot, but Kamala Harris ended that by saying that fair governance is the key for all of these goodies, the key for inclusive growth. Now, as Kamala Harris was making this speech, an opinion piece appeared on the Bloomberg News Service written by the Zambian president, and it was subtitled, "Democracy Can't Buy Food." It doesn't, you can't eat democracy. And then the point he is making, it was quite a thoughtful piece. You can see it here. You cannot eat democracy. The point he is making is that democracy does require consent from the governed. And then in a country like Zambia, which again is negotiating with the IMF, Zambia is going to have to make some pretty severe budget cuts. This is going to hurt people's income. And people may be at risk of feeling like, what has democracy done for them? People may disagree with this, some may agree, but it is a very thoughtful piece. And the point again he's making is, if people are feeling poorer, does it make it more difficult for them to support democracy?
Well, I think he's actually making a very good point there. And Laurie, I mean, we're not quite seething with resentments, but we can't help but notice that the vice president hasn't included Nigeria on her agenda, or the continent's other regional power, for that matter, South Africa.
Isn't that bizarre, Charles? And not only has Kamala Harris avoided Nigeria, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, was in Africa in late January, didn't check in with Nigeria. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, in Africa earlier this month, also did not go to Nigeria. Now, I've asked some questions, and the best answer I'm getting is that certainly with those earlier trips, Yellen and Blinken, those trips were ahead of the Nigerian elections, and perhaps these officials didn't want to be seen as influenced or attempting to influence an election. If you remember back in 2015, as Secretary of State, John Kerry went to Nigeria, made a couple of perhaps ill-timed comments, and was accused of interfering in the election. That may explain why Yellen and Blinken didn't hit Nigeria, but it is particularly suspicious, isn't it, that Kamala Harris hasn't visited either of the regional powerhouses on the continent. Now, when Janet Yellen was in Africa back in January, she did visit South Africa, but the optics weren't great for the American government. She arrived almost the same time that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was taking off. Optics weren't great there. I don't think the American government loved that.
Well, nevertheless, she is in Africa. Will this flurry of activity help to bring the continent back into the U.S. sphere of influence?
I mean, it's an excellent question, and I don't think anyone would argue that Africa was not a focus under the Trump administration. In fact, Trump used some rather unsavory language to describe some of the countries of Africa. But I think it really depends on how much Kamala Harris talks about democracy. I think a number of African countries are happy to do some business with Russia and with China. China lends a lot of money, doesn't ask for things like human rights standards, although we are now learning that China extracts a pretty high interest rate for lending money. Russia does provide much of the continent with defense equipment and personnel, and again, is not all that concerned with human rights issues. So America probably has quite a lot of ground to make up, particularly after having ignored the continent for 4 years under Donald Trump.
Laurie, thanks very much indeed. Laurie Laird, Arise business correspondent, talking to me there from